So what we're going to do today then is discuss this law of God that many of you have learned about. Many of you probably don't see it as God's law. Many of you probably see it as just a law of the universe or a law of nature, the law of attraction. Before we discuss anything to do with any of God's laws, I would like to sort of present a brief summary about some of the things that we need to be aware of with regard to God's laws. And so what I'd like is, if you have any questions during this summary, that you just do not hesitate to put your hand up and I'll point to you and you can ask the question that you need to ask. But there's basically two things to bear in mind with God's laws. Firstly, there is a hierarchy. There's an R missing in there, of laws. What I mean by a hierarchy of laws is that some laws take precedence over others and in fact have the tendency to make it seem like the law that they take precedence over is null and void in certain circumstances and situations. Now let's give you an idea of that. Let's say you've got a law called the law of gravity. Most of you have heard of that one? Yes? What goes up must come down, that kind of principle. Or if you throw something off, obviously the attraction of gravity will pull it towards the ground. Now that law, you could say, is what I would classify as a low-level physical law. It's a law that governs many parts of the universe, but there are other laws that supersede that law or take precedence over that law under certain circumstances. For example, the law of aerodynamics is a law that takes precedence over the law of gravity under some circumstances. So if you build a wing that's curved in nature that causes the air or air pressure on the top of the wing to be less than the air pressure on the bottom of the wing, so in other words you shape the wing like so, then as the air is forced over that wing, the air here compresses and the air here expands, and that means that there's less pressure above the wing than below, and as a result of that, and I can see I'm going to fight with this mic now. As a result of that, it provides what's called lift, right? And lift means that we can then fly. And when we fly, it's almost like the law of gravity no longer exists because we're now doing something that's completely like against the law of gravity. We're in a very heavy aircraft, often hundreds of tons, and yet it can fly and it make it seem like the law of gravity does not exist. Does that make sense? But of course the law of gravity still does exist, doesn't it? It's still there operating. We've just found another law that supersedes it or takes precedence over it under certain circumstances and situations. Does everyone get that? So this applies to all of God's laws. All of God's laws have hierarchy. In other words, there are some of the laws that God has made that take precedence over other laws that God has made under certain circumstances and situations. And it's just up to us to discover the circumstance and situation. So potentially there might be other laws that enable us to levitate. Does that make sense? And we'll call them, shall we call them the law of levitation? Now, we haven't discovered them yet. So that makes it a bit hard to use them, of course. But potentially those laws may exist. All right? And then above those laws, on another physical level, there may be a whole set of laws regarding teleportation. But we don't know whether those laws exist or not. But it's possible they also exist, yes? And at some point in the future we may discover them, and therefore once we discover them and know how they work, we then can engage those laws. And when we engage that law, it's like this law and this law and this law doesn't exist under those circumstances. Even though they're still there, we're now overcoming those, if you could call them lower level laws. So what I'm suggesting, with all of the laws that God has made in all of the universe, is that every single law is a part of a hierarchy of laws. Everyone understand what I mean by that? So in other words, every single law has a position in which you can discover another law that can supersede, or it doesn't really supersede it, does it? It more takes precedence over it. In other words, it's more important under certain circumstances and therefore takes action. So, first principle we needed to look at is that the laws have a hierarchy of some kind. Now, I have given a whole series of discussions that are available for download on YouTube about the hierarchy of God's laws, about how the hierarchy actually works. So I won't necessarily go into it here about the hierarchy unless you would like more details about the hierarchy as we're going through this discussion. Is there any questions about the hierarchy of laws? You can see how that works? Okay. So the second thing that's important to understand is the laws all have a scope of operation. They all operate upon something. So for example, have you noticed that the law of gravity it's very dependent upon an atmosphere, isn't it? In the sense that if there is an atmosphere in a certain location, so here on Earth, for example, you can engage the law of gravity, but if there is an atmosphere, so in other words, if you jump out of an aeroplane without a parachute and you engage the law of gravity there, but as the law of gravity is engaged, you accelerate towards the Earth, and then you hit a time where you can't accelerate any further. And I think the speed is around 200 kilometres an hour if you're just falling. And you can't accelerate much further because now there are other things. There's the pressure of the wind, or if you like, or the atmosphere against your body that prevents you from falling as fast as what the law of gravity would normally dictate. So if we lived in a vacuum, the law of gravity would mean that as we accelerate, we would continue to accelerate, right, towards the surface of the Earth if we were falling. But on the Earth, because it has an atmosphere, as we accelerate, we get to a certain terminal velocity, it's called, and then beyond that point, you can't accelerate any further, right? So you can see that the law has a scope in the sense that it has an area of operation, but under certain circumstances and conditions, it just can't work any further than it has worked already. Secondly, each law has a scope in the sense of what it operates upon. So we are very, very used in the physical universe to seeing all the physical laws. So you could say the law of gravity. I'll just write things a bit more clearly than I am. So the law of gravity. Can anyone see the green easily? No, it's not very good, so we'll throw that one away as well. And we'll use the black. Has a physical scope in the sense that it operates upon my physical or anything with mass. So it operates upon my physical body, it operates upon anything that has mass. Now, if something doesn't have mass, or there's another law that involves it, in other words, it becomes a gas or some other kind of law involves, or there's an updraft, therefore the things with mass don't fall to the ground. And that's why we have clouds in the air that have millions and millions and millions of tons of water sitting up there, but because of different laws, not just the law of gravity, they stay in the air instead of all falling to the ground. Right? So the law of gravity has a scope of operation. Now, we can then assume that if the law of gravity has a scope of operation and the law of aerodynamics have a scope of operation and all the other physical laws that we see have a similar scope, then we must also see that if we're going to talk about a law of attraction, that it must also have a scope of operation. And if the laws that we've looked at, so the law of gravity has a hierarchy, or it's a part of a hierarchy, if you like. So if it's a part of a hierarchy, then it would make sense that the law of attraction is a part of a hierarchy of laws. It's a logical conclusion that we can come to. So, the law of attraction, we could then state, is a part of a hierarchy of laws, and it has a scope. It has a scope of operation. What does it operate upon? Well, the law of attraction operates upon very similar things to what all the other laws operate upon, or many of the other laws operate upon. So let's look at the types of things that the laws can operate upon. Firstly, there is everything in the physical universe. So there we're talking about anything that we can see with our eyes or measure with whatever equipment that we've currently come up with measuring. And even some things that we can't see with our eyes still exist, like, when we feel the breeze on our face, we know that we're feeling and we're breathing oxygen. It's something we don't see, but it is definitely something that we feel and benefit from. So we know that there are physical laws that affect all of the operations of those things. So you could say the scope of God's laws include physical, whatever is happening to us physically. In addition to that, we have what is called a spiritual body or a spiritual form. And there must be laws, just like there are laws that operate upon our physical body. There must also be laws, it would make sense that there are, that operate upon our spiritual body. So you could say part of the scope that we have about the laws will be spiritual in nature. In other words, they'll operate upon the material that makes up our spiritual body. Now, have many of you, are all of you aware that there is a spiritual body? Like you are made up of a physical body as well as a spiritual body? Most of you are aware of that? Because I'm very happy to digress on some of this discussion and fill in the gaps if you're not aware. So just yell out if you're not. So you could say that part of our nature is that we have a physical body. So there's my physical body. Drawn very quickly, and there's my spiritual body. The two are joined together through a cord. It's called the silver cord. And also, many spirits are not aware of, but we are also one half of a soul. So this part is our soul, and that's our spirit body and our physical body. So the laws, all of the laws, operate upon the physical body. They also operate upon the spiritual body, and they also operate upon the soul. This being the half of ourselves. So you could view your physical body just as a robot that your soul uses in the physical world to express itself and experience the world. Does that make sense? And you could use the spirit body, if you could view it this way, as a more finer construction of material that has a different set of laws that determine its construction. It has a genetic structure still, and this spirit body can only exist it exists in all forms in the universe, but it only can be seen by other people who are in the same body, if you like, most of the time. Although many of you at times have seen a person in a spirit body, or potentially. The reality is that we can eventually see a spirit person, but you could still view that as a robot used by the soul to express itself in the spirit world. Does that make sense? Right? So what I'm saying is that this is the real you, and these two things are just the robots that the real you, or the mechanisms, the physical structures that the real you uses to express itself. Yeah? Does that make sense to everyone? It's very important that you understand that, because we want to understand that the scope of the laws operate upon the three parts of our nature, not just on the physical level. And in fact, what you'll find is that there are far more laws that God has made that actually operate upon the highest part of our nature, our soul, than there are that operate upon any other thing in the universe. So there are far more laws that operate upon the soul. And if we define the soul as the real you, that's your personality, if you like. That's the person of yourself, the personality. It's the emotions that you have, the desires that you have, the passions that you have, all of the feelings that you have and so forth. That's the real you. And you know, sometimes what goes on in your mind is not really the real you, actually, because your mind can be influenced by other people quite readily, if you think about it. Somebody can drop a thought into your mind, but it's very, very hard to drop a feeling into your soul without you being open and aware of that occurring. Okay. Is there any questions so far? Yeah, if we wait for the microphone. Can you wait for the microphone there? Thank you.
I just can feel that I'm reacting on what you say about personality and real you. For me, personality is something that is created by our lives and our mind very much. Personality is, for me, not the essence of the real me.
Well, actually, I would say your personality is made up of two things. Firstly, it's part of what God created as a part of your being, but then also it's about your experiences. So it's a mixture of your experiences along with what God originally created or intended. So every single person that God's ever created was created differently to every other individual, and that's a part of what I view as their real personality. Often what a person portrays to the world is not their real personality, but rather a figment of their mind during their life's experience, which is not the same thing as their real personality. Does that make sense? Mario, with that slider I noticed, just as a side point, whenever you put your finger on it, and slide it, if we set that level of that mic just once and leave it, you'll find that there's something wrong with that slider. I just noticed that just as I was setting up. Yeah. Can you just speak into the mic again for me? You can say anything you like.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
That's better.
Now I'm with you with the personality. There is a difference. There are like two personalities. One that is created by this life, and then the real personality that you came here with your soul. That
you can also connect to and develop. But many people don't, because what they do is that personality is often suppressed by their parents in favour of what their parents want the child to be, and as a result the child goes up with seemingly a completely different nature than what God created the child to actually have. So when I'm talking about personality here, I'm talking about the real part, the one that God created, not the part through the experience that was created. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's very important for me to make a clear difference there.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. Good. Okay, so if we call the soul the real you, right, then what I'm saying is that the laws operate upon the physical part of you, which I don't believe is the real you, because at some point in the future that part will probably die and will be decomposed into the elements that compose this physical universe, and after all of that occurs, in the end you'll still be you. So that's not the real you. And in fact, there is the potential that the spirit body as well may die. Nobody really knows that, but there is that potential that the spirit body will die. And but my feelings are the soul itself was created to live eternally, right? And in fact, to expand eternally. But the laws operate upon each one. So if we're going to examine the law of attraction, we've got to expect that the law of attraction is going to operate upon these different levels of ourselves at different times. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So any questions before I proceed? Yeah, if we wait for the microphone, it's just around the back room. Just if you can remember to wait for the microphone, otherwise everyone won't hear.
As you mentioned, how the personal body and the spiritual body was in comparison with the soul, you mentioned the word robot. I wonder if there is a special reason why you choose that word, or could you as well use tools for the soul? Or
yeah, there's no special reason. You'll find with me, generally, I'm pretty plain speaker, and there's no hidden agendas. So when I use the term robot, it's just a way of saying it's a living organism that is used by the entity of our soul to express itself. And the soul doesn't need that living organism to exist. So, and this is why I sort of view it like a robot almost, like it's something that's automated by the soul, something completely different.
Yeah, for me, many words seem that they might be not the same.
I agree.
The same word for you as me, and there are many metaphors built in different things, like robot or tool. But so I think that you also talk in metaphors.
I would use those two metaphors interchangeably. Like the physical body is a tool that the soul uses, or you could say it's a robot the soul uses, or it's to be frank, what it is a genetically structured living organism that is connected to your soul that the soul uses to express itself. In a physical universe.
How do you make a difference about emotions and feelings? You use that word now and then.
Yeah, I'm not too hung up on the different terms for different words, to be frank. So I often use the term emotions and feelings interchangeably. I'm not a person who goes into a lot of what I would call nitpicking, we say in Australia. What would you say here? Hair splitting. Yeah, so I'm not the kind of person that will hair split about different words. My feelings are that emotions and feelings, while you could define some feelings as specifically as feelings and some particular sensations you have as emotions, in the end, the way that I normally think of feelings are as something that you physically are able to sense through some of your input structure, which is your body, whereas emotions are something that come from within yourself, if we wanted to separate the two. But I sometimes don't bother separating the two in a discussion like this. So often I feel the soul is like a storing house of all of the different feelings and sensations that we've had throughout our entire existence, as well as all the different emotions that we've had throughout our entire existence, as well as all the different belief structures that we currently possess, and also all of our intellectual nature, all of our personality, all rolled up into a ball, if you like, and I would call that our soul or our true self. And our true self can be damaged, I feel. So a lot of people believe it can't be, but I feel that our true self, and I don't mean the self that God created us to be, but the self that we've embraced through the process of our life can get damaged through the choices that we make in particular. But also the choices that other people make can damage our true self. But I would still look at the feelings, the emotions as all being a part of the soul, the actual real person. And in fact, when you speak with spirits in the spirit world, you'll find that many of their feelings and sensations that they had when they were on earth, they remember them completely, and they also have them in even more stronger sensations. So in other words, once a person leaves the physical and enters the spiritual life, often what they find is that their physical sensations increase in intensity through the spirit body compared with the sensations that we had in our physical body. And when you discuss these things with spirits, you'll find that almost every spirit recognises a huge increase in the sensitivity that they have towards their sensations of their body, but also their emotions as well. Yeah.